When we are the most courageous, we are talking about love because people think, oh my God, you are being Pollyannic. You're not looking at the world. And it's like, because we are looking at the world, we know we need to talk about love as a force and as a way for us to be together.
Welcome to the One Girl Revolution podcast. It's your girl, Kate, here. This is the place to find inspiring stories of world-changing women and girls every single week. We have a new unique story coming your way every week, so make sure that you subscribe to the One Girl Revolution podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and everywhere you listen to podcasts. One Girl Revolution is a nonprofit multimedia organization that is dedicated to elevating the voices and stories of world-changing women and girls. You can find all of our podcast episodes, watch our Emmy-nominated documentary series, donate to our nonprofit organization to help us continue our critical work to elevate women's voices and their stories, and so much more on our website at onegirlrevolution.com. Go to onegirlrevolution.com today. On this week's episode of the One Girl Revolution podcast, I welcome Becca Stevens, founder of Thistle Farms. I have loved Thistle Farms for so many years now and followed their great work and have been wanting to have Becca on for ages. Thistle Farms is a social enterprise that for over 25 years has lit a path of healing and hope for women survivors of trafficking, prostitution, and addiction. Becca's hope for a global movement for women's freedom began with Thistle Farms' first residential home and now has grown and evolved into a multifaceted social enterprise that is empowering women and helping them find healing and freedom. After experiencing the death of her father and subsequent child abuse when she was 5 years old, Becca longed to open a sanctuary for survivors, offering a loving community. In 1997, 5 women who had experienced trafficking, violence, and addiction were welcomed home. Thistle Farms' first house was just the beginning, and now they do so much more, including providing housing, financial independence, and by selling beautiful goods. Their candles are insane. They smell so good, and they support a great cause. Becca has an incredible story. In this episode, she shares her own life story, her own survivor story, and how she overcame so much in her life. She is a nonprofit leader, entrepreneur, Episcopal priest, and she has founded 13 nonprofit and justice enterprises, mentored another 60, and she has raised over $75 million to support them. Becca has authored 12 books, including her own memoir, and she's been featured on PBS NewsHour, The Today Show, CNN, ABC World News, named a CNN hero and White House champion of change. And she holds 5 honorary doctorates. Drawn from 25 years of leadership and mission-driven work, Becca leads important conversations across the country with an inspiring message that love is the strongest force for change in the world. I am so thrilled to welcome Becca to the podcast. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Becca. Becca, welcome to the One Girl Revolution podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here and to be able to talk about all this.
I am so honored and so excited to have you on. I've followed you and your work for so many years now, and I feel like it was just a matter of time before we had you on One Girl Revolution. And so I want to talk about all of the great work that you're doing. But before we get into that, I would love to rewind and hear a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and just a little bit about your own life and your own story.
Absolutely. And hi to everybody listening. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It is how revolution started, sharing a story and trying to get to know each other through story. So I'm happy to share my story. And that story is basically that I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. And when I was 5 years old, my father, who was an Episcopal priest, was killed by a drunk driver, leaving my mom, who was 35 years old, with 5 kids in Nashville. And she was just trying to figure out how to make it. And she was amazing and create an environment where we could, thrive and be creative and all those good things. But also what happens to a lot of young women is when you have, really one tragedy, then another follows. And it is just kind of the sad truth that after my dad was killed, then one of the guys that stepped in, he was one of the elders in the church to help us, was the one who started physically and sexually abusing me starting at the age of 6. And it really went on for like 3 years. And it's so wild because those horrible but holy years of abuse really shaped the rest of my life, how I understand myself in the world, how I piece together my career, how I've raised my kids. You know what I mean? Like those things, those scars, those remnants on women's bodies really shape their lives.
Yeah. And I know that that's shaped even what you've gotten into with Thistle Farms, and you're able to help so many other women who have been through similar things and also relate to them. Never want to sugarcoat things that we've been through or things that have happened to us, but I think that there are so many opportunities that we have in this life to really be an example and help other people through our own stories. When one woman stands up and shares her story, it gives other women the ability, the power, the courage to stand up and share their stories. And I know that you've done that.
Totally agree. And I think it's like, oh my gosh, why is that stuff secret? And I get why things are secret when it's like you're the perpetrator. And God knows I've done enough that, in my life and in that journey that I needed to be forgiven for. And that's the harder stuff to talk about. But like when you get to the point where you realize, I didn't do anything, I was a little kid. When you get to that point, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm happy to share it because I don't want anybody to think it's them. Like I did something or I'm messed up. It's like, no, you're not crazy. The world is crazy. A world where 35-year-old men can do what they will with young women. That's crazy. And it's like the revolution that you're talking about and, supporting is when individual young women take those universal issues that land on their backs and say, I'm strong, I'm well, I can share it and I can move forward with that story, not in spite of it, but because of it and how it has shaped me.
Becca, how have you found healing? I know that you've been through so many difficulties and traumas throughout your life, and everyone's journey is different. But what took you from that little girl who suffered so much abuse to being able to be where you are now as an adult, as a person who is healed, but also I believe that things that we have, it's a wound that we carry, right? It heals, but it's still, like you said, something that we walk with the rest of our lives. What was it that kind of brought you healing?
So I will say a couple things. One is that sometimes I'm reluctant to talk not about my story, but I feel like my story in many, many ways is just pales in comparison to the stories of the women that I have served through the community of Thistle Farms for years. So sometimes I just feel like, oh my gosh, I had a great mom. I had 4 siblings who cared for me. I was able to kind of like sail through the education systems and all the things that would also kind of pave the road to prison didn't happen for me. And there sometimes, honestly, my teenage years, I just got lucky. But I would say that, part of the reason I started the communities, almost 30 years ago, the reason I started that was because like I long to believe that love heals in our lives. By that time, I'd gotten married. I was out of divinity school and ordained in the Episcopal Church, like my dad. But I knew I wanted to start communities for women because I think I wanted to believe that love is healing and powerful. But I had to, start small and make mistakes and figure it out as I went so that I could really grow into that idea. Does that make sense? Like you grow into healing.
Yeah.
Like you're not big enough for it sometimes.
Right. And I think a lot of things that we experience in our lives, we're healing our entire lives, right? We're just a work in progress. And sometimes other people you encounter or experiences you have can also bring healing to something that you didn't even know you hadn't healed from, right? When someone's sharing this
Yes.
story, it's amazing. And that's the power of even women coming together and sharing their stories, because we have the power to not only give each other courage and empower one another, but also to help one another on that journey towards healing.
And I think for people going through it, if any of your listeners are kind of trying to figure out that path, words like love and healing are so vague and they get confusing. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
And so, what I want to say is what I intentionally mean by those words. So, when I say healing, I don't think like, it's a miracle cure or it's something that you get over. I think of healing as this intentional walk we make towards wholeness, an intentional walk we make towards wholeness. And we do that for our whole life. I mean, it ends on our last breath, which is so beautiful that we can just keep moving towards this idea of wholeness in our lives and being the women we were created to be. And when I talk about love, I don't think of it as like this just spiritual or interpersonal way of interacting. I think of love truly as, this force for good and change, a force that, changes politics and economics, and a force that we tap into for changing ourselves and changing this world. Without love, any revolution would be pretty hollow, right?
That's so beautiful. And I think it's so important for us to define the words that we use. And so that was so beautiful, just you sharing your definition of both of those, each of those words. Watch One Girl Revolution's Emmy-nominated short documentary, The Girl Inside, on our YouTube channel or at onegirlrevolution.com. The Girl Inside features a poignant look at the stories of incarcerated women within Cook County Jail and a life-changing academic course taught by Dr. Laura Biaggi called Storytelling as a Healing Art. This short documentary reunites Dr. Biaggi with 5 of her former students for a special one-day course on the transformative power of our stories and our voices. And what is revealed is the girl inside. Watch the Emmy-nominated short documentary The Girl Inside today on YouTube or at onegirlrevolution.com. So, Becca, I want to talk about Thistle Farms, but you're on this journey towards healing. You get married, you go to Vanderbilt Divinity School, you are ordained. And then in the midst of that, you're volunteering with women experiencing homelessness and addiction and meeting so many different people. And then Thistle Farms happens. How did you get the idea? And I know it was called Magdalene, or I believe it was called Magdalene first and then became Thistle Farms. How did that idea spark? Was there a spark moment? Was it a mix of different things where you were like, hey, there needs to be these communities like you shared? What was that spark moment?
So there really was a moment. It was crazy. I mean, because I had the idea of Thistle Farms. I had this idea of how exactly I would want to be treated if I was coming off the streets or out of jail. I was meeting women that were on the streets, asking for money for a pair of socks. And it was like, oh my gosh, if you need a pair of socks, you need a lot of other stuff. And I wanted to really create this safe place. And so I imagined, that we would have houses where women could stay for free because nobody had any money, stay for free for 2 years so you can, have time to get your teeth and find a good therapist and figure everything out. And then it was no authority in the house. My biggest trip up always was authority, people trying to tell you what to do, because when you are abused as a little kid, authority is not safe. It's why prisons are so traumatic and how systems don't serve women who are healing from little kid trauma. It doesn't go well when people tell you what to do. So that was my thought and my idea. And it's based on, old school stuff like from 13th century, how women came together in community. But I had so much going on. My husband had a record deal with Columbia Records. I had one baby. I was getting ready to have another baby. I was a priest. There was a lot going on. And then one day I pulled up in front of this, what I didn't really even realize that it was a strip joint, got my son out, who was already born. He was about 4 at the time, pregnant with the other one, did this work, tried to get him back in the car. And he was arching his back, like really arching his back while I was trying to put him in the car seat. And I realized he was looking up at this strip club, big sign. It was Classic Cat. And this woman was dressed like in the memory of a cat suit. And he looked at me, he said, "Hey, Mama, why is that lady smiling?" And his question absolutely broke my heart, because it was like, someday that little boy is not going to ask that question. It's going to get completely normalized for him. And I want him to know what I mean when I talk about respect and love of women. And that day, after seeing that sign with my son, I got the board organized and filed the paperwork to start Thistle Farms.
Wow. What a powerful story. It's
It's like
amazing.
sometimes you just have to get off your tush and really try to do something small. I mean, it's not like you're going, "Oh, I'm going to fix all commercial sexually exploited problems in the world." It's like, no, that's crazy, but it's crazier to think anything will ever change if we don't do something small and beautiful with a lot of love.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just that spark moment where you see a need. And I'm sure that at that moment, Becca, you had no idea where Thistle Farms would go. And it's probably good that you didn't know how much it would grow and evolve, because that can be terrifying for any of us. You have an idea and you're like, okay, I don't really want to start like a big organization. I just want to do one thing to maybe help one person. And those spark moments happen from time to time in our lives. And so I love those stories. So thank you for sharing that. How did you get the idea for the name? How did it become Thistle Farms?
That came, again, like most things, it just happened. And the reason it happened was, like you said, we were starting with a name called Magdalene, with the idea of that was the first woman preacher, you know, telling the story that love heals and love rises. But quickly, when I was going out to the streets to meet the women in the alleys where they were, walking and sleeping, turning tricks, trying to survive, or going out to the Tennessee State Women's Prison to try to interview women, the only flower left was thistles. It was in the alleys. It was growing up through the chain link fence. And it was like, oh my gosh, these are beautiful. I know they're noxious weeds. I know people don't love them, but they have this beautiful taproot and beautiful purple center. And it makes sense that this is our symbol, the thistle. And then I came to learn, like a couple years later, that thistles are used, in natural medicine, kind of regulate your system after trauma. And like if you just go to a Walgreens or whatever, your drugstore, you can get thistle extract, and it's supposed to detoxify and restore your liver. And that's when I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, we picked the one weed out of a million in the world that actually the women can use for their own healing. I mean, you think about the drugs and drinking in the life out there, and how women need to detoxify their liver. It's one of the first things. So it's perfect.
Becca, so you start Thistle Farms, you start doing outreach to women, like you shared, at prisons and strip clubs, and just finding any way that you can connect to women. And then talk about that. And then how has it grown and evolved? I know there's so much going on at Thistle Farms now, but can you talk about those early days and what it was like, and just how it's grown and evolved to how it is today?
Absolutely. So it really did start out as a housing program. About 4 years into it, we realized the people that were working together was like, and that includes women who were in the house and graduated from the 2-year residential program. Look, if we're going to talk about loving women, we have to be concerned about people's economic well-being. So that's when we started manufacturing bath and body care products, because some of the women that we were serving couldn't get jobs. Their arrest records were huge. Their skills were minimal. And it was like, we can do this. I mean, we're salespeople, we're entrepreneurs, we can do this. And that's when Thistle Farms was born, as far as a manufacturing company. And we really did it kind of like just home parties and telling our story and getting people to buy our stuff. And then it started growing, and online sales were starting to grow, just globally. And we, were rising with that trend. And then Whole Foods took on an interest in us. In the meantime, ever since the beginning, we've had this it feels like an anchor sometimes, this huge waiting list of women that want to be helped. I mean, it's huge. And so we started going, we're going to open up houses that are sister communities around the country. And the first one was in New Orleans. The second one was in St. Louis. And we started saying, like, let's all make stuff. We can sell each other stuff. Let's figure out how to grow this together. And we'll be more powerful because we don't believe justice, is a competitive activity. It's not a competitive sport. So let's work together. And so we did, and we grew it. And then it was starting about 2006. We were getting calls from global friends around the world doing some of this work and saying, hey, can we figure out a way to do this? Or I was starting organizations. So fast forward 2023, we have like 92 sister communities around the country with more than 600 long-term free beds for women survivors. And it's now like more than 30 global partners. We're helping about 1,400 women who are surviving, just dehumanizing poverty and fleeing violence and war, and who are survivors of gender-based violence. I mean, just all kinds of beautiful artisans and survivors. And honestly, that is my heart and my greatest joy. Like sitting with a group of women in Nepal and stringing beads, there is nothing finer in the world. And hearing, a story of resiliency after what people go through, it's makes you so hopeful about the world.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's like right now, I think that's what everybody needs more than anything is like the news just bombards you and it just feels overwhelming and like nothing is going well. And it's like, I can't trust anything. I don't know what to believe. And then over and over again, when I go and just sit with a community of women anywhere, it's like restores your faith. There's so many amazing and good people out there, and they're coming together and they're doing beautiful things. And, part of what our job is to amplify those voices.
Yeah, and that's exactly what this podcast is all about, Becca. And I'm so grateful that you're sharing your story here, because we need to hear these stories of resiliency, like you said. And women are the most resilient beings in the world. You see or hear from someone who has been through hell and back, and next thing they're jumping in the trenches to help other women. Or, not only are they changing, not only can women change the trajectory of their own lives, but they can change the trajectory of their children and their children's children and generations to come. And I love hearing those stories and seeing those stories. And I know that you see those stories and hear those stories every single day through your work.
Well, the other thing too, though, is that it's not just us thinking that and that we're so Pollyannic. It's like there's two things. One is that all the data shows this. I mean, all the data shows when you invest in women, you heal communities, and when you rape women, you kill communities. That's why it's a tool of war. That's why, sexual exploitation specifically, on women's bodies is meant to partly control and break not just women, but their families and communities. So you're right, when we invest in women, it doesn't take long for them to say, okay, here's what we need to do to fix this community. Here's how we can come together. Here's how we can do safety. That's one thing. And then the other thing is that not only does the data show it, but when we are the most courageous, we are talking about love, because people think, oh my God, you are being Pollyannic. You're not looking at the world. And it's like, because we are looking at the world, we know we need to talk about love as a force and as a way for us to be together. And I think what you're doing, what your listeners are doing when they are talking about a revolution based on love, is like being so courageous and understanding that that is what the world longs for most.
And we can be the change, right? We can be the change that we want to see in the world. And that's what we talk a lot about on this podcast, is sometimes it's the little things that we do, getting involved in the organizations that we feature here, donating, following on social media, sharing the great work. It gives so many people hope, and it spreads love like you shared.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be, I think sometimes too, like you're saying, it's like, it doesn't have to be one thing. Like how you share it is your thing. It could be like, I'm a painter, so I'm going to paint something that is an expression of what that kind of powerful love is for resiliency and survivorhood. It could be, I'm a singer songwriter. I'm going to create this. It could be, I'm a letter writer. I'm going to write my legislators. I mean, it looks all different for everybody. And, it's not possible for everybody to sign up and volunteer for a specific organization doing something, but it is possible for all of us in response is to think, how can we be a voice of love, specifically on behalf of women who have gone through so much and on behalf of ourselves.
Becca, you are experiencing or encountering so many amazing women through all of the years that Thistle Farms has been around and every single day. Is there a story or two that of a woman that Thistle Farms has worked with that really impacted you, or you feel like really embodies the work and the power of the work that you do every single day?
Oh my gosh, there's a million of those, right? And I invite anybody who wants to dive deep into stories from Thistle Farms to just look up thistlefarms.org or look up beccastevens.org, and you'll see some of those stories highlighted over years and years. I will say right now, I mean, there's so many, honestly, but right now, I just got off the phone a minute ago with a woman who's 35 years old. She's in Gaborone, Botswana, in Southern Africa, and she's a survivor, Pearl Nkumbe, who had to leave home at like 15 or 16. She made her way after horrific violence and ended up getting a degree. She had 2 babies, and she had this desire to start the first center for safety for women who have survived gender-based violence in Botswana and who are trying to figure out how to make a life and who have had to prostitute themselves, all those things. So several years ago, she and I got together and we got to really meet each other. She came to the U.S., to Nashville 2 years in a row. We wrote grants together. We did this work. I've been in Botswana, I think 2 or 3 times. And we just signed the paperwork to buy her property for the Ratong Center, the Healing Love Center in Botswana. And it's like, we're all just jumping up and down. This woman has done so much and has done it with such grace. Like, she's a hero of mine. And I just can't wait to go back for the ribbon cutting. But I mean, it's expensive and it takes a long time to do this work. It takes years and years.
Yeah, that's the hard thing about so many different projects and so many different programs. And even like you shared, just with a building or a program, it can take there's so much red tape and obviously fundraising, and there's so many different
And
facets.
wiring
People
money
don't
to
see that.
Africa. You have to wire money to Africa,
Yeah.
and you have to have a fiduciary responsor in the US, and you have to pass all the different laws and make sure the boreholes on the land work. And in the midst of that, you're dealing with 10 women in the middle of Botswana, and she's trying to manage like a lot of trauma in their lives.
Yeah.
When there is a horrible situation, their version of the FBI comes in and pulls a woman out. They bring her to Pearl, and she's trying to figure out, okay, I need this, I need this. And I just feel like I'm so happy to be a small part of her vision. And that's the stuff, like I said, that brings me joy. There's 100, 200, 300 stories of women who have come through, backgrounds of bad and horrible abuse as children, who have come through the program and who are raising their own families and healing in beautiful ways, who have found leadership in Thistle Farms and around. I mean, the director of all residential housing is a graduate of the program. The director of all manufacturing, graduate of the program. All those stories are beautiful, but what I love is getting the privilege to work with heroic women around the world that are starting, from scratch and doing the heavy lifting.
Donate to One Girl Revolution's nonprofit organization to help us continue our work, highlighting inspiring women and girls that are changing the world through their lives promoting their work and their organizations, and building a powerful and positive force out in the world dedicated to empowering women, their voices, and their stories. Donate at onegirlrevolution.com/donate. That's the number onegirlrevolution.com/donate. Well, everything that you're doing, I encourage everybody to check out your website. I will, of course, share your social media links and your website. If anybody is looking for a beacon of light, a beacon of hope, they can look to Thistle Farms because you're just doing amazing stuff. You also have a cafe, I know, that opened in 2013. So if people are in Nashville, definitely check it out and stop by. But I can't wait to continue to follow everything that you're doing, Becca. Where does Thistle Farms go from here in your dream of dream worlds? I know that it's grown and evolved so much more than you probably ever could have imagined when it started. Where do you hope that Thistle Farms goes from here?
Yeah, and I want to say that it's not as big as I thought it would be.
Well, let's go. Keep
It
going,
is.
girl.
I know. I mean, I feel like it's a really good idea and a lot of people coming together to create a global movement for women's freedom. We have a long way to go, and so what I think is like if people are inspired by the story, buy our soap, you know, don't think this is beautiful, but then go buy your soap somewhere else. I mean, part of how we get going is everybody, puts their money where their heart is. And that's our hope is that people use our products. They come in, they see us, you go online, you find out maybe I can be a mentor for one of these groups overseas. Maybe I can, volunteer to be one of the social media advocates. There's all kinds of stuff to do. And we're all, everything is online for people to see. And I'm so grateful to meet new friends. That's my favorite.
Well, I want to encourage everybody, like I said, to check out your website. We always do a give back gift guide, Becca, and at One Girl Revolution. And Thistle Farms has always been one of our leading favorites on the gift guide. So we're coming up on the holidays. So I always encourage people to buy gifts, like you said, soaps, t-shirts, all the things that you have on your website. People should buy their Christmas gifts off of that. So we will be sure to keep promoting everything that you're doing. How can people, so besides that, how are other ways that people can support the work that you're doing and how can they get involved?
Well, that was a lot what I just said. I think that's kind of it, really. I mean, really just explore the website, look at it, buy our products, make a donation, be a social media advocate, put out a good thought for us in the world, and use our products, use our soap, buy them as gifts. We, before the holidays, will do the vast bulk of our sales in those few weeks in December. And that is the time, it just means the world to us. It means women are busy, and have money and get overtime and can, be with their children. One woman said, the holiday season is the time that this past year in December 2022, she said, I feel like I'm chasing my tail and I'm so busy. And she said, you have no idea what a blessing that is. I've spent the last, 5 Christmases in jail and there's nothing to do. And to be busy in the holiday is a big gift.
Yeah, well, you're doing such amazing stuff. And I can't wait to continue to follow everything that you're doing. And everyone who's listening, I will encourage them to follow you on social media. Becca, you're such an amazing beacon of light and you're doing so much and you've done so much in your life. And I know there's so much more that you want to do, but I'm so curious if you could get to the very root of why you do what you do every single day, why you're so passionate about this work, why you're so passionate about working with women and working with Thistle Farms. What would you say that root is? What's the root of that?
Well, I think it's exactly in the story I shared with you at the beginning. I think that's for all of us. It's in our story. If we dig deep and uncover stuff, we recognize ourselves in the people that we serve and the people that we meet. And you kind of are going out in the world to find your own healing as well as hopefully touching the lives of someone else. So for sure, for me, the roots are in my story and what I went through, turn my heart to real flesh for being able to offer compassion for the women that I was meeting.
I also want to encourage people to check out your memoir. I will put a link to that. I know we didn't talk about it, but just to read your story too is such an important thing. And I know that that supports the great work that you're doing as well. So I will put a link to your memoir in the show notes as well. Becca, you are a one girl revolution, but who is a one girl revolution in your life? Who is a woman or girl that inspires you?
Well, my biggest hero inspired person long time ago was a woman named Dorothy Day, and she started the Catholic worker movement. She started a beautiful community starting in New York City in the Depression, and it grew and grew. And what I love about her, there's so much, but one of them, the things that I admire and gave me strength all through the years, was she wrote her autobiography. The title of it was called The Long Loneliness. And I was like, oh my gosh, she started a revolution and she's calling her autobiography The Long Loneliness. And I think that is like something that has changed my life, to think this sacred work about seeking depth and truth. Some of it is kind of lonely, even when we do it together and even when we're surrounded by community.
Dorothy Day is such an incredible woman. And I encourage people, if they don't know much about her, like you said, check her out and read some of her writings and everything that follow her story, because it's just so inspirational and so inspiring, just like you, Becca. So thank you so much for all that you do. And I'm so grateful to be connected with you. Before I let you go, I always end this podcast on one question. So I'd like to ask you, if you could leave women and girls around the world with one message, what would it be?
Love heals. That is my mantra. That is my whole theology distilled and shaken into 2 words. Love heals.
Becca, thank you so much for being on the One Girl Revolution podcast. Thank you for all the incredible work that you do. I can't wait to continue to promote it, share it. All of our followers will continue to follow everything that you're doing, buy all their Christmas gifts from Thistle Farms, and continue to support your work. But thank you so much for being on the podcast. And thank you for all the incredible work that you do.
Thank you. It's an honor to get to share the story, and thank you for all you do.
Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at One Girl Revo. That's the number 1 Girl REVO. And you can find more information on One Girl Revolution at onegirlrevolution.com. That's the number 1 girlrevolution.com.